That's great. Good morning, everybody. Just waiting for a few participants to join us there this morning. You're very welcome. Really looking forward to our session this morning, shaping our electricity future in cooperation with Sony. So really looking forward to this session. So where participants have just joined this, just bear with us for one minute there, please, and we'll kick off shortly. Just give another few seconds. Okay, I think we may kick off. So look, you're very welcome. You're all very welcome to this morning's webinar, Shaping Our Electricity Future. My name is Paul Clancy, I'm CEO of the Chamber, and we're delighted you could join us this morning, and a special welcome to our Sony panel members this morning as well. But before we start, I'd like to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with our Chamber members and Sony as well. So just a bit about the event overview. You have already received a copy of this, but it's no harm to revisit it. Sony recently launched Shaping Our Electricity Future, a new report that details four innovative potential approaches to fundamentally change the grid to achieve Northern Ireland's clean energy ambitions while maintaining an affordable and secure supply for customers. And this event forms part of a 14-week public consultation on the report as Sony seeks feedback on ways to deliver clean electricity grid for Northern Ireland by 2030. And I'm delighted to welcome Natasha Saee, who's Head of External Communications and Stakeholder Engagement from Sony, and David McGowan, Senior Lead Engineer from Sony as well. I'm really looking forward to getting into the presentations this morning and seeing what they have to say. Now, look, this is a two-way process here. We really do want you to ask some questions. So we have a text box at the bottom of the screen there. And if you could ask some questions, if you have any questions at all, please place them there and we'll see them come up on the screen, and we'll place them to Natasha and David as we go through the webinar. And hopefully we'll get through them all. If we don't, we'll come back to you afterwards and hopefully get them all back, replied to you. But today is about engagement. So we really do encourage you to please ask questions. So without further ado, Natasha, if I could hand over to you and if we go through the start of the presentation.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul, and Chamber members for the opportunity to speak to you today, and to Anna for all the event management, because these things don't happen overnight. So just acknowledging your contribution, Anna, thank you. I'm very pleased today to be joined by Dr. David McGowan, one of Sony's most senior engineers. David's going to take you really through the nuts and bolts of shaping our electricity future, and particularly what it can mean for the Northwest. I'm also very pleased to have the support of Daniel McLaughlin, Director at Belmont Strategy. He's helping me to drive what is probably Sony's most extensive stakeholder engagement program to date. Paul has mentioned earlier this year, in March actually, we launched Shaping Our Electricity Future. It's really all about preparing Northern Ireland's electricity system for decarbonisation, and particularly for that interim milestone of 2030. Really pleased to say the project has landed very well across our stakeholder groups. We've had some very positive sessions with the Minister for the Economy, the Minister for Agriculture and Environment, as well as other key bodies such as the Utility Regulator, Northern Ireland Electricity Networks, who of course are our key partner in this process, the Consumer Council, Renewables NI, and actually last week we held an industry forum with more than 120 delegates, which was absolutely fantastic for us. There is a recording of that. Now that goes into slightly more detail than we're going to go into today. That also talks about what we're going to do in terms of shifting operations and the evolution that we feel needs to happen in the all-island markets in order to reach 70% renewable electricity by 2030 targets. So if you want more information, if you do want to get into the meat of operations and markets, I'd be really pleased to send you the link to those presentations. And we have a recording of the industry forum, which lasts about 3 hours. But if you are interested, please let us know, and I'll make sure that you get the link. So why are we here with Londonderry Chamber today? Well, it's really pivotal that you understand that the Northwest is going to play a central role in the decarbonisation in Northern Ireland's clean energy future. It'll help you start your thinking. It'll help start conversations around that, what that could mean for you as businesses. in terms of economic opportunities, but also what challenges there will be for all of us as we try to deliver 70 by 30. We would encourage you as businesses in the Northwest to respond to the public consultation that we're driving at the moment. All voices are relevant, all voices are important in shaping Northern Ireland's electricity future. And we really hope that this session will help inform you and will be of value to you. Daniel, if you wouldn't mind skipping to the next slide, please. Thank you. I think from Sony's perspective, really, the complex jigsaw of Northern Ireland's energy future is really starting to come together, particularly now that we have those policy options from the DFE, which were launched, of course, last month, and really clear signposts in terms of interim renewable energy ambitions, with Minister Dodds really strongly articulating her vision for no less than 70% electricity from renewables by 2030. And that's what we're working towards now. And I suppose the moves by the UK government also last week in setting a milestone target to reduce carbon emissions by 78% by 2030 is of note. Sony really feels that Northern Ireland is well placed through the natural resources that we have, through Northern Ireland's long-standing generations of engineering prowess, and now this real skill, this blossoming, I suppose, sector in terms of data that we have at the moment, that we can continue to punch above our weight when it comes to decarbonisation, and particularly decarbonisation of the energy sector. Daniel, if you can please move to the next slide. So I guess we need to just take a moment to consider how far we've come. We've had a lot of success, and this chart shows that huge success in delivering renewable generation. And when I say we, it's policymakers, it's Sony, it's Northern Ireland Electricity Networks, it's generators, it's businesses, it's communities, it's landowners, it's everyone that's contributed to Northern Ireland's renewable generation portfolio. But if we are going to reach Minister Dodds' renewable ambition of at least 70 by 30, then we need to double the amount of renewable generation that's connected today to deliver clean electricity solutions, particularly as heat and transport sectors decarbonise. And look, we have a lot to do. That us, Sony and all of those key players have a lot to do, and we've just got under 8.5 years to do it. But look, we feel that we're in a really good place. We've delivered Northern Ireland's 40% electricity from renewables policy goal a year in advance of the timeline. According to DFE's latest figures, we're nearly at the 50% mark. And due to success of all island innovation programs, Sony and our counterparts in the South, EirGrid, can now handle 70% renewables on the grid at any one time. And that's world leading, guys, for a small island system. So it's something that we are really proud of, but which we didn't achieve on our own without that ecosystem, which I keep referring to. We're soon to trial 75%, but in order to reach Northern Ireland's renewable electricity ambitions, we need to be almost capable of driving an entirely fossil-free system by 2030. And that's the challenge. And that's what shaping our electricity future is all about. Daniel, if you could skip on, please. So at Sony, we're about supporting our policymakers to find what is needed. And that's a balanced solution to decarbonisation. We're going to utilise our deep expertise across operations and across market and across the grid. And that's what David's going to talk to you about today, to ensure that we deliver at least 70 by 30, and that we do so without compromising security of supply, and by ensuring that the Northern Ireland consumer, those for whom we're ultimately doing this for, to make sure that that group benefits. And so in doing so, we will seek to minimise any impact on costs as we work to deliver 70 by 30. And our clear commitment to you today is that we will maximise the use of the existing grid and add only additional infrastructure where necessary. And it's also really important that you know that Sony has no vested interest in adding to the grid. We don't own the assets. They're owned by NIE Networks. So we've got no financial gain here. We've got no skin in this game. We're doing it because we want to support policy. Daniel, if you could please skip to the next slide. Thank you. So look, just to reiterate, we believe that we have the technical solutions, which David's going to talk to you about, to delivering 70 by 30, including this reimagining of the grid. including outlining to you the importance and the pivotal role that the Northwest will play, which David will discuss. But look, this is the ecosystem table that I keep talking about, the key players involved. Sony doesn't hold the only seat at this table. We can't do this without the likes of local businesses, policymakers, the utility regulator, NIE. Public acceptance, a just transition, and consumer benefit, as well as economic considerations and deliverability, are all absolutely essential to the success of the 70 by 30 pathway. And that's why we're consulting on this project so widely. Daniel, if you wouldn't mind skipping on. As I've said, this is the most extensive consultation we've ever carried out. You know, I had years of really good engagement with Londonderry Chamber in relation to the North-South Interconnector and other key projects that Sony have worked on, but really this is our most extensive consultation to date. And we are putting transparency at the heart of this process, as with all our consultations. But this slide identifies some of the key stakeholders that we're engaging with. Ultimately, we would intend that our final view on the change needed across markets, operations on the grid, that's our Shaping Our Electricity Future report, will be published in the autumn. And we will let you all know when that's out, and we will feed that into the Department for the Economy's Energy Policy Strategy. Daniel, if you would mind skipping on, thank you. So look, just before I hand over to David, here's some of the detail that you'll need if you're interested in sharing your views with us, and we hope you will do. The consultation portal is live until the 14th of June. And look, if you don't get the details now, we will be bringing this slide up later, but of course you can contact myself or Daniel or Paul for further information in relation to the options and how you can get in touch with us. So look, I'm going to hand over to David, and I think you'll have a very informative session. Please do ask us questions. That's what we're here to do. We want to answer your questions and make this as valuable to you as possible. Thanks so much.
Good morning, everyone. It's really good to be here at the Chamber and be able to share the work that we're doing in shaping our electricity future. And just at this stage, I just want to introduce you to Northern Ireland's electricity grid at the transmission levels. So in terms of the map that we see here, we can see an orange circuits, and they represent the highest voltage level that we have on the transmission system, and that's 275,000 volts. And then the grey lines are also part of the transmission system, and they're mainly in the north and west of Northern Ireland. And we can see here that from that perspective, it is within this area, and we can see how that is sort of being influenced. So you've got one large orange circuit coming up into Kilkira Power Station, and then there's a circle of 110 circuits which are part of the transmission system. And historically, renewable generation has been connected onto the distribution in the west, and that then feeds up onto the 110 networks and then gets transported onto the 275 towards the east of Northern Ireland. So the demand split in Northern Ireland is about 25% of demand is in the north and west, with about 75% of the demand in the east. And that's typically what has happened. There was renewable located in the west, and that flows to demand in the east, where there's higher levels of population density. So in terms of the next slide, please, Daniel. This slide again then gives you an illustrative example of how the renewables transport on our electricity system. And what we see now is, you know, we're looking at levels of electricity demand well beyond the 40% renewable target set by DFE for 2020. But what we need to look at is how do we achieve 70% by 2030? That means the grid is going to have to carry at least 1,300 megawatts more of new renewable capacity by 2030. This output will depend on the weather sources. And from that perspective, then we have to make sure that as we operate the electricity system, that we have the right level of capacity on the grid. And we also have the market and the operational systems in place that allows us to bring that energy to the market as efficiently as possible. And what we find is that the renewable electricity is typically generated far away from where most of that electricity is consumed. So if we want to move to the next slide, please, Daniel. In terms of the shaping our electricity future, we have looked at an approach to really discuss how we deliver grid infrastructure. And in terms of that, we have derived 4 different approaches that we will discuss today. So I will lead you through the 4 slides and we will discuss those. In terms of what we need to do, we need to make a stronger, more flexible grid that is appropriate for the 2030 ambitions. In terms of this consultation is based on what SONI can do, but it also considers how others can help reach this 2030 ambition. So in fact, across the 4 approaches, we're dependent on what other organizations can do to make the journey possible. And in terms of what we're looking at, this is a 9-year transition to 2030, but it's only a stepping stone on towards future, zero carbon future. In terms of the approaches, there will be some projects that we bring forward in the transmission grid that are common to all 4 approaches. And what we do state here, and as you can see in the slide, that we have the 4 approaches. It's not going to be built on one of these approaches. There's going to be potentially a strong theme that emerges through the discussion and the debate, but they'll have supporting elements from the different approaches that we are presenting today. So is it possible to achieve the 2030 goal with all 4 draft approaches? No, it's not. In terms of what we're looking to do here, we're trying to deliver this transformational change on the electricity grid within 9 years. And what we potentially see that we could potentially deliver around 9 projects within a 10-year horizon. And that's based on our historical experience. And there's a large level of community, societal engagement. And Natasha is much more experienced in that area than me. So as a planner, we look at the needs of the projects, and then we look at the projects that need to come forward. And then in terms of that, we need this public engagement space that allows us to, help people understand why that infrastructure is required and needed. Indeed, a lot of the debate that we're trying to bring through in the approaches is to, as Natasha mentioned earlier, we're not backed by wanting to build more grid. We want to build an electricity system that is efficient as possible by not having to build grid. So the 4 approaches that we'll present today will demonstrate how that changes across the 4 different approaches. What we have is one of the approaches will achieve 70%, but not by 2030. Another of the approaches will achieve 70%, but there's actually high risks around deliverability. So what we need to really do is understand the scale, cost, and impact of moving towards clean electricity in the future. And part of this is, again, coming back to, we need to hear your views so that you can help us make the right decisions. So if we move to the next slide, please, Daniel. In terms of, if you look at the consultation piece, each of the different approaches are measured on their technical performance, their economic performance, their environmental performance, their society and acceptability, and also their deliverability. So that just sets into context like the multi-criterion analysis that we put each of the approaches through. And I think we have to bear in mind that we have to deliver this in an affordable way, but also be mindful that it has to deliver on the ambitions for decarbonisation as part of the strategy, which is compliant with the UK net zero targets. In terms of generation led, this is a new way to consider how to do grid development. Currently, SONI and NI networks have to connect new electricity generators to the grid wherever they request. So that doesn't take into account the weaknesses and strengths of the network. We have to do an assessment and then see what infrastructure is required to allow the connection, and then how to then look at the wider social impact of the reinforcements that will be required to deliver access to the market. With this approach, we want to look at a different approach. It would take government policy to enable this and regulatory support. With this approach, new generation would be located to where there is existing strengths on the network. And again, in terms of what we would look to see here is that that would bring generation closer to where demand is located. And I think when we look at this, from a Northern Ireland point of view, we could see that there is potential for East Coast offshore wind, which would be quite close to the demand centres of Belfast, and that would minimise the amount of grid infrastructure required at that location. Alternatively, Tunes Plateau off the north coast, quite close to Derry, would allow you to connect in to Kilkira and that region of the network as well. So in terms, there is options of how we can do deliverability of diversification of wind turbine type within the system. So in terms of what we look at here, preferred locations are at stronger parts of the network, and they do take into account the effects of local demand. We can see from this approach that we can reduce the number of projects to around 8 projects across the decade at a cost of about 120 million for facilitating that, and that's the social cost of the projects. It does require 700 megawatts of offshore wind in the east coast of Northern Ireland. And in terms of that, then you're looking at 500 megawatts of solar energy and inland wind farms to support that. This approach is highly likely to succeed in terms of deliverability. And in terms of social acceptance, what you're looking at there is there's a less number of projects, and that really helps the teams go out and facilitate the permitting of the various development projects. If we go to the next slide, please, Daniel. In terms of developer-led, this is again business as usual. So we have had a successful, delivery of projects to deliver on the 40% target. And a lot of this success was due to the incentivization of renewable capacity, and indeed the goal of the government to deliver on that target, and the regulatory supports that were required to make that happen. So as a result, Sony and NI networks have connected new sources of electricity regardless of system strength. And again, what we see from this approach is, look, to hit a 2030 target, we've actually absorbed most of the capacity that's on the grid. And what we're looking at here is about 19 projects to deliver on this at a cost of about 360 million. So in terms of looking at the deliverability, that is a major challenge. And look, we have extensive experience on how long it takes to plan, manage, and gain public support. And in this respect, we would say that it's very challenging to complete this number of projects by 2030. So in essence, generators could still connect. They will be heavily constrained. They will have curtailed energy. They will have constrained network energy. That means that energy can't get the market, and that's a loss of revenue to generators, and it's also a loss to the consumers because the price is not being pushed down in the wholesale market. And also then the subsidy support schemes will have to be paid back in terms of constrained payments to the generators. In terms of the next approach, Daniel, this is a technology-led approach, and it tries new ways to move clean energy across Northern Ireland. So in terms of the portfolio, it's similar to the developer or the generation-led approach. And this could take new ways of moving clean energy from the north and west to the demand centres in and around Belfast, where the higher density populations are. This would involve looking at installing underground cables using high voltage direct current. So it's actually taking an existing technology but using it in a new way. So traditionally, these types of technologies may couple markets. This is using this technology within an internal market. So it's a new approach to taking energy within the market where there's a constrained area and pushing it to where the demand is. So the Moyle interconnector would couple the SEM with the GB market, and that's an HVDC technology. So this is taking that type of technology. Operationally, it's very challenging. There's other types of technologies that we could employ on the network, which would help us minimize the grid build. And that would be power flow controllers to help us push power where we need it in the network and help us better optimize the use of our grid. This project is slightly less in terms of the number of projects compared to the developer-led approach. You've got 14 projects. Very challenging to complete on time just because of the scale and number of projects. And in terms of cost, you're looking slightly over £500 million to deliver on the projects. And again, the portfolio is the same as developer-led, 700 megawatts from inland, 350 megawatts of offshore and solar to complement that. So then if we move to the final approach, I know we're running short for time, so hopefully we'll wrap up in a couple of minutes. Demand led, in terms of this looks at looking at putting large demand electricity users closer to the sources of clean electricity are. So we're really looking at the high tech and the pharmaceutical industries or other large energy users who need a direct connection to the transmission grid. At the moment, we don't have any direct customers connected into the transmission grid, and we don't have any influence on where they locate. So in terms of partnership, we would require, government policy, regulatory support, partnership with Invest NI, bodies like yourselves in terms of the chamber, in terms of understanding the business principles. This is a solution where indeed where we're trying to say is if we've got locations of renewable generation, bring the demand to the generation, bring business to where that energy is. That will help us minimize the number of projects on the grid because we don't have to transfer it from the north and west to the east. So in terms of what you're looking at, you're actually delivering a less number of projects, 10 in total. This means that we have a more deliverable option again, and it's actually the least cost of all the technical requirements in terms of cost economically. And again, this is looking at a system where you have 700 megawatts of onshore wind farms with about 350 megawatts of offshore and solar complementing that. So indeed, this is basically from lessons that we've learned in other jurisdictions, you're able to take large energy users, place it close to demand, and you can actually minimize the level of infrastructure. And again, in terms of societal and acceptability, the teams have the ability to plan and manage that engagement with society with a lower number of projects. If we go to the next slide, please, Daniel. How do the different approaches compare? This is just some of the metrics which are within the report. It looks at the risks associated with the project deliverability. In terms of that, look, please do get into the nuts and bolts of the report. Look at the risks, look at the technical performance and the multi-criterion analysis, and it will give you an overview of where we get to. In terms of security of supply, we design and plan to our planning standards, so the network will be designed to give the optimal outcome. In terms of developers of renewables, you can see here that the most sort of beneficial one to developers, continued business as usual. But in terms of looking at, high demand electricity users, again, there's options here for investment in looking at, different ways to use electricity in our sectors. So I think, look, we've given you an overview of the various approaches and how they come to be. I think, Daniel, the next slide is hopefully the last slide. Yeah, okay, in terms of what does this mean for the future electricity in the Northwest? If the next slide then, Daniel, please. Look, the opportunities from shaping is, there is continued opportunity for investment in the renewable industry in the north and west of Northern Ireland. There is opportunities for sure in terms of investment in new technologies such as energy storage, power to gas, large energy users, and that may help address regional economic balance. Because if you can locate these technologies within the electricity grid, we can use them to help minimize curtailment and constraint, and therefore reduce actually the need for infrastructure development in terms of overhead lines. In terms of, there's great cooperation between Donegal and the Northwest Regional Energy Strategy. That is really good to see how you can set up a framework that allows decarbonisation in a regional basis. And indeed, there are opportunities for offshore wind. And again, I mentioned Tunes Plateau earlier. So it'll be interesting to see how emerging energy strategies and supports for offshore technology could be beneficial to the North and West as well. And if we go to the next slide, please, Daniel. Okay, I'll hand back to Natasha.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, David. Look, it's just to say again that we're committed to collective and collaborative decision making at SONI. We really do want to hear from you as we shape our final plans for your grid. And if we could just skip on, Daniel, again, just a reminder of how you get in touch with us. If you're able to skip on there, Daniel. Sorry, thank you. Yes, so the best and quickest way, I suppose, for you is to click on to our consultation portal at consult.sony.ltd.uk, but you can also email us or write. Thank you very much indeed for your time. And look, David and I are happy to take any questions that you might have.
Well, if Natasha and David, if I could kick off, if that'd be okay. Look, it's really informative. And thank you so much for the presentation. It's very clear and very easy to understand as well. So thank you. So that's really, really been helpful. Just a question I have just on the interconnection, you mentioned about that and the success that you had of that. Is it possible to supply that east part of Northern Ireland with Southern Energy? Are they in a similar position in terms of 70-30? How are they doing in terms of their renewable challenges? Could they export renewable energy to NI to satisfy that need rather than having to build wind farms off the east of NI? Just to...
David, that's probably a more technical question, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I think, Paul, one of the major benefits, like, you know, I'm within the Future Networks team, and the shaping our electricity future is basically an all-island study. So from that point of view, we look at the energy flows on an all-island basis. So I've looked at basically in terms of the principles of the scenarios and how they're built and how the utilization of the grid, it looks at least 70% on an all-island basis. So from that perspective, we're actually taking all of those dynamics into play. And then we're optimizing locations. So for each of those scenarios, where to locate the optimal. So look, in terms of where to locate in Ireland, it's close to Dublin or other major demand centres sort of across the island. So from that point of view, we've definitely taken some of those considerations, and they're actually sort of built into the different approaches on an all-island basis. But we look, the key factor here is there's two different jurisdictional, you know, networks and regulatory authorities and sort of policies around that. So from that perspective, we can look at the Northern Ireland context of the Northern Ireland electricity grid as a sort of distinct study on how it's impacted by these approaches.
Yeah, and just another technical question maybe too, Natasha, if I can jump in, was just in terms of combined heat and power. I know from a commercial point of view, there is an opportunity for some business to generate a large portion of electricity, and when they're not actually using it themselves, they can export it to the grid. Do you know, is there much of that in Northern Ireland currently, or is that something that's been looked at as a contribution to the electrical supply network?
That was raised recently, Paul, just in terms of, I think, yeah, one of our stakeholder sort of engagement meetings had mentioned actually the use of CHP and the benefit that it can be to business and industry. And I think in terms of that, like, it's very important to feed back in. It typically is quite small scale. I do know that in terms of like, you know, local, there's power to heat technology in East Germany. I think it was the Rostock region, 50 hertz, published something. So I think in terms of, you could have spilled energy, or you could actually have processes to do district heating schemes as well. And I think they're quite interesting, because I think in terms of power to heat, so people talk often about power to gas, but there's actually technology power to heat. So commercialized heat pumps, which could generate heat and then create a local district heating network. So there's various opportunities, I think, in terms of combined heat and power. But again, that's why we're coming out to industry and saying, what are your views on this, and how can you shape us, you know, going forward, and bringing those types of assumptions into our modeling and, you know, our thinking in the best way to roll out the grid infrastructure.
Well, and I think there's a great message you're sending through there, Dave, Natasha, as well. Is the you know, if you're producing electricity locally, renewable, try and generate, or what is it, create industry that's going to use it locally as well, so you don't have to transmit it long distances, because I think you lose some energy as you transmit across Northern Ireland as well. So it's not as efficient maybe as well. So if you can keep it local, it helps for all those reasons. And maybe from a chamber perspective, that's a message we can certainly endorse, to say, look, when we're talking to industry, please come here. We're producing a whole load of electricity here that we're shipping across to Belfast, and why don't you come here, and we have it on your doorstep, and it helps the environment, and it helps us reach our decarbonisation targets for the grid as well. So it's a win-win kind of thing from a sales perspective, from a business perspective, and it's something that we wouldn't have discussed before. So maybe that's something you want to jump in there, Natasha, with that.
I was going to say, you know, I think when you think about how well placed the Northwest is, you know, you've got Project Kelvin, you've got all those data and engineering skill sets there already. You've got the natural resources. You know, it would seem to me that that you're very well placed to leverage the decarbonisation journey. And the only thing I would say is that, when you are responding to the consultation, I think it's important to note that Sony can't, and we don't have the power to say to new businesses, you must locate where the grid is strong.
Yeah.
You must locate near power sources that are green. That will take policy change, that will take regulatory change. But the more voices that come into that discussion, I suppose the more powerful that message will be.
But you're right,
I guess
Natasha.
That's the whole point.
That's the whole point. And a lot of companies are looking at their corporate social responsibility as well and their carbon footprint, and it can be part of the sales process to pitch. So, when in terms of business coming into the north, this is something I'm kind of taking away from it and saying, come here, look, it's going to help. Where if you generate locally, it's all good. It's a good story from our perspective. I understand you can't get into that, but from us selling the Northwest, I think it's an asset for us for sure. So just some other questions that. So the next steps in the process for Sony, then I guess that's the consultation. We can send this out to our members, obviously send the link out, and I know we will be sending a survey out as well on today's seminar as well, or a webinar, to get some feedback on that as well. But in terms of the next steps, you might just take us through, Natasha, what the times you did mention at the very start again, just the deadlines and.
Sure. So there's another event coming up that your members might be interested in. We have a civic forum, which is being held on the 11th of May from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. And that's really where we want to hear from NGOs, environmental NGOs predominantly, academics, consumer representatives, business representatives, that wouldn't be involved in the technical or the engineering or the electrical space, that broader business interest. We've actually got a sort of expert facilitator in to help independently generate discussion, and that we will be feeding them that discussion into our consultation reporting. So what's going to happen then is we've got quite a heavy series of events and engagements until the 14th of June, and then the consultation closes. And then the engineers, such as David, will take all of the data that we've garnered from the consultation process and start really delving into that and mining that and helping that shape their final report into, which of these four options do we take, or do we take a blend, as David explained at the beginning. And then we will publish our final report. We would hope to be able to come back to the chamber and to let you know. I know we're already talking about planning some sort of an energy seminar or webinar in November. To tie in with COP26, which is great. So I think it's a really timely year for all of this as well. And then we will also importantly be feeding our final report and all of that data into the DFB. David, I don't know if I've missed anything, but very happy for you to come in if there's anything you'd like to add.
Yeah, like I think from our perspective, our next phase sort of in the planning side is that roadmap. What's the deliverability and the milestones that will be required to bring it forward so that we, deliver infrastructure fit for purpose,
I think the message too, David, is there's been massive progress made, really, hasn't there, really? And it's that last 30%, that's the challenge to reach the renewable energy target. So really good. I have a question came in here. At present, electricity supplied around 20% overall energy demand. Is your 70% renewables based on forecast electricity demand or as a percentage of the overall energy demand, including heat and transport?
We'll give that one to Natasha. I'm only joking. Look, what underpins this? So thank you for your message. And I think in terms of like Sony as a business, like we publish a number of public facing documents, and in terms of tomorrow's energy scenarios, and I think we presented, a while back to the chamber on the tomorrow's energy scenarios. That underpins all of this analysis. So there's a tomorrow's energy scenarios for 2019 on the Ireland side, which takes into account the climate action plan. And then there's tomorrow's energy scenarios 2020 for Northern Ireland. which looked at ambitious. It was a stakeholder engagement process where we went through and said, what is the level of ambition we should look at? That created our underpinning scenario. Just in terms of the direct answer to the question, agree, it's slightly under 20% in terms of final use demand. In the forecast, we look at a total energy model, and that looks at the forecast. So by 2030, we're only looking marginally higher than the 20%, maybe 22 to 23%. But then you need to accelerate in terms of electrification of heat and transport. So by 2050, you're looking to be at least 50 to 60% of final use energy consumption coming from electricity to sort of hit a net zero target in the energy sector for Northern Ireland. So definitely a really important metric to be looking at. What is the share of electricity in final use demand? And the one thing that's going to drive that is energy efficiency. So moving away from inefficient uses right down into the most efficient uses. So that our final use consumption is actually much less. If you go to tomorrow's energy scenarios 2020, you can see the charts and everything's demonstrated in terms of primary energy use and final energy demand as well.
David, we could put a link to that now, couldn't we?
Yep.
Along with the video or the recording this morning, which will hopefully answer that question. Natasha, that was the questions that have come in. I'm just wondering, was there anything else you'd like to add?
No, just wanted to thank the Chamber for all of the great engagement, not just on shaping, but throughout the years. We're very pleased to be able to say that we can now come back into the fold as a corporate supporter, which is really important to us. We are going to have to leverage our relationships with you, because as you can see, the Northwest is going to play a really pivotal part in Northern Ireland's energy future. And we want to keep the conversations going. We want to make sure that we are coming out in a transparent and early and meaningful way to business stakeholders, to communities, and to landowners in the Northwest as we progress this and really try to make that policy, that ambitious policy happen, so that it's done in the best way possible for Northern Ireland's environment, our economy and our society. So I guess to coin a phrase well used over the last sort of 2 years on something completely different, but we're all in this together, and it is great to have that partnership with the Chamber to enable us to do that.
Well, Natasha, thanks so much for your kind words, and thank you for your support of the Chamber as well. It's greatly appreciated. So David, unless you have anything additional you'd like to add there, I just might wrap up if that's okay. Yeah. So look, I'd like to thank you everybody for their participation today, and particularly to Natasha and David for their presentations. And I know Daniel has been working in the background as well there, making it all, keeping the glue together. And thanks so much for your preparation, and Anna, of course, in the background as well. If you have any further queries or questions you'd like that we didn't get answered, please send them on to us and we'll forward them on to Natasha, or if you want to go directly to Natasha and David, I'm sure there's no problem either there. We can put their contact details on. And just to remember, there will be a survey going out, so we would really appreciate if you could, we'll send that in the link as well, if you could fill out the survey to give some feedback to Sony on the event today, that'd be brilliant. So that was everything that we wanted to cover off today. It's been really informative. David, being an engineer myself, brought me back to my college days, and I started talking about CHP and all the other things, and ice loadings and things like that on the transmission line. Yeah. So look, I really enjoyed it, and thanks so much for your time this morning. Wish you the very best, and look, we as you say, we have a lot of things in the diary, Natasha, during the year. We look forward to working in close partnership with you. So everybody have a great day, and safe travels if anybody's traveling. Okay, take care.
Super, thank you everyone.
Bye now, bye.